My wife cheated and got a toy from her affair partner, so I made sure they both paid the price. I, a 29-year-old male, have been married to my wife, a 30-year-old female, for 7 years. We have a daughter who is 5 years old. Depending on who you ask, some would say we got married young. I know I heard a lot of that while we planned the wedding. The thing is, we have known each other since late in high school. We were both relatively mature for our ages when we were younger. She knew she wanted to go to medical school, and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It's part of why I felt we were meant for each other. My HVAC business was already doing really well before I turned 20. I suppose our younger selves would be very happy with where we are, well, career-wise at least. But some things have happened that make me wonder whether there were some red flags I missed, or whether people just want what they want, regardless of how much you care and how much effort you put in. I've never put a wrong foot forward when it comes to my wife. We pretty much grew up into adulthood side by side, so you can't fault me for thinking that I knew her fully. Enough of the yapping, let me try to cut to the chase. As I've said, my wife went to medical school. She did great there, and now she's a general practitioner, which is awesome. I've never been prouder of anyone because I watched her graduate from high school, then university. I will admit that I sometimes feared I'd feel inferior with a high-achieving wife, but I'm doing fantastic for myself. I didn't go to college, but that's because I knew it would be a waste of my time. Instead, I used those same 4 years to push hard on some new enterprises I was trying to start, like a detailing business, and my hard work paid off. So yeah, I made a lot, and that surely helps me feel good about myself. Do I regret not going to college? Even now, nope. So my wife, the doctor, obviously works at a hospital, and as expected, she has colleagues she's friends with and some she steps away from. Typical workplace drama, whether you work in a retail store or a tech company. The thing is, it became a bit disconcerting to me when a certain name started to pop up a lot more than the other coworkers I heard about quite often. Let's call the guy Devin. If you've ever heard of the stupid concept of work husbands, that's what Devin started to sound like to me. Anytime something happened at work while she was at lunch, she always happened to be eating lunch with Devin. She was scared of walking to her car when leaving work late at night, who was there to save the day and accompany her. Devin, of course. There was even a really annoying day when she started to gush about Devin's 2 cats and Chihuahua, which he couldn't stop showing her photos of. At this point, I obviously became very cautious of Devin. I think any man would. After all, it seemed like Devin was interested in her, given how much he seemed to be around her. I joked with her one day, with an ulterior motive, asking whether Devin knew she was married. She said he did, and after a brief pause, she reassured me that I didn't need to worry about him one bit, that he was basically her brother. This didn't really convince me, and it was made worse because I hate hearing sentences that include the phrase "like a brother" to me. But I decided to let it go at that moment because I didn't have anything solid beyond his name coming up a lot to base strong suspicions on. Now, before I go into what happens next, I need to give you a little bit of background on the sexual side of my relationship with my wife. I've never been the kind of guy who needs to have sex 5 times a week. Now, once or twice in 2 weeks fills, or should I say empties, the tank for me. The best part was that this worked perfectly for my wife too. She isn't a high libido kind of woman, so we had a really harmonious sexual life in the early stages of our marriage. Unfortunately, almost out of nowhere, her interest in sex just died. We spoke about it, and she blamed hormones, stress, the weather, upcoming exams, her diet, and so on. With each thing we tried to fix, nothing changed. In the end, I never blamed my wife for this, but honestly, even though I could cope with sex just twice a month. Now here's where that comes in. One day my wife comes home and excitedly tells me that she's interested in us trying to spark up our life in the bedroom again. At this point, it had been about 2 years, and I'd wager that we hadn't had sex more than 5 times in that period. So of course I was a bit stunned by her sudden enthusiasm to get things started again. "Oh wow, what's making you so eager for us to start trying again?" I had to ask, because sex almost never seemed like something my wife thought about unless I brought it up. I had a discussion with some people at work about sex, and it really brought up a lot of things that we might be able to try out to spice things up, was what she responded to me. I was on guard when she said this because talking about sex should be less awkward or juvenile among doctors than any other group of people, but I'd never gotten the idea that she and her so I asked her what they talked about and who she talked about these things with. After all, I know most of her co-workers by name. Just Devon and some of the others," she said. I know most of her co-workers by name, so the rest of them being relegated to the others left me feeling uneasy. I felt like challenging her at that point because I felt like it might have been a personal conversation with Devon, and if she was talking about sex with Devon one-on-one, that would not be in good taste. "Obviously no problem, I'm listening," I said. So she continued, telling me about how the conversation went from how important sex is to sexless marriages to sex toys, and then she let it slip that she used our case as an example in this conversation. "I mean, I've never been bitter about the whole sexless situation, but it can be extremely frustrating. So to hear that it's being brought up by her in public conversations, with co-workers many of whom know me rather well, made me very unhappy with her. However, my wife is a rather private person, so this didn't sound right to me." "So this was just you and Devon then, right?" I said quickly to catch her off guard and watch her reaction. She seemed startled and flustered, but she was quick to deny it. "No, it was me and some of the others. Devon was there, though." I looked closely at her. She tried to maintain my gaze, but her eyes kept darting away. There were probably 5 seconds of silence before I said, "Tell the truth." She said nothing, and this time she just looked down. I saw a teardrop fall from her eyes. "It was just you and Devon, right?" Looking back, this was uncharacteristically relentless of me, but I think all the Devon stories had me on something of a mean streak. Looking back, I'm glad it came at that moment because I might have let it slide otherwise and ended up musing about it for hours. She squeaked out a yes. "Okay, continue the story then," I said to her, but she didn't say anything because I had caught her in a lie. We just sat there in silence for a very long time, and I was extremely pissed, but I did my best to keep my composure and stay calm. After about 2 minutes of nothing but quiet, "I'm sorry for lying. I knew it wouldn't be a good look to have a private conversation of that kind with him alone." She looked at me, but I kept a stone face. "But I swear we just talked. There was nothing else to it. I don't think you did anything unless you were banging in the broom closet at work. I swear he's like a brother to me. I've always said it, and I hate that you don't believe me. There's nothing between us, and talking to him about it was just like talking to a friend or even like talking to a therapist or something." At this point, I realized I was shaking with rage because I could tell that my wife was slowly trying to turn this thing around against me. Suddenly, she was about to be the victim. I've had this happen during earlier fights when it felt like I was being cornered, and at this moment I could feel that urge creeping up, so I simply tried to leave the room. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I can't be here right now. I need to clear my head." "I'm sorry," she said again, but I walked away to cool off. In the following days, my mood didn't improve, but I did my best to act normal with her, take care of our daughter, as if I hadn't just been lied to. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my wife had been venting frustrations in the wrong direction. If Devon was the guy my wife was going to for advice about intimacy, that bothered me. Eventually, I stopped being able to hide my frustration from her and couldn't help myself. I began doing some digging on Devon, even going as far as checking up on his social media and his public posts, where I quickly realized he was the one guy that I hated to have come into my life. He was a decent-looking guy, he had a decent enough job, and he even had his own family he's married to. The reason I cared so much was that it became evident that he had a bit of a penchant for flirting and even posting some inappropriate stuff that seemed to imply he was also seeing someone on the side. I was sure my wife didn't know this, but that didn't matter. My wife did not know him well enough to be talking about her sex life to a guy who could have more ulterior motives than being a brother to her. Now, at this point, you're probably asking how I took all this in, and honestly, I got a good gut feeling to act upon what I was learning about Devon. I felt like I had the upper hand here, I had the moral high ground. So instead of expressing my anger directly to my wife, I kept a level head and decided to give her a surprise gift. One morning I went to my storage area and dug out my old favorite toy, a realistic-looking fleshlight that I had tucked away. I know it sounds weird, but I felt really vindicated by the idea that she might get the irony of it. After all, this toy had been hidden away for quite some time, and I hadn't used it since before our daughter was born, but I thought it might get my point across to her in a clear way. So I decided to wrap it in some pretty wrapping paper and drop it off in her car so she would see it first thing when she opened the door. I left her a note that said, "The best toys are the ones you know how to use." I hoped the sarcasm would hit her right in the gut. Later that day, I was on a job when I received a text from her asking me to come home right away. I didn't like the panic in her message, but it was clear I had gotten under her skin. By the time I returned home, I could see she was visibly upset, shaking with anger. "Did you really think this was funny? I think you've had a laugh at my expense for too long. It's time to open your eyes," I replied coolly. At that moment I knew she realized I was serious, that my reaction wasn't just a moment of rage, but a calculated move that was going to get her to think about what she had been doing. "I don't understand why you'd embarrass me like this," she said. "This is humiliating." "Humiliating is what I'm feeling. How do you think I feel knowing that you've been gushing to your coworker about our sex life? Devon doesn't belong in our marriage, and neither do I want to hear him compared to being like a brother. Just admit you're overreacting, you're being ridiculous. Am I? You're the one who had no qualms sharing your feelings with Devon and made it sound like he has the right to know our private business. I've had it. And it doesn't matter if you want to hide behind this facade. You made this public, and now I'm showing you how that feels." We argued for some time, and while she was clearly furious, I could tell that I had hit a nerve. She didn't have much to say beyond calling me immature for my reaction, but I stood firm. I'm a man who doesn't like to share his private life. The following days were hard because we were both feeling a lot of anger. My wife had even started asking me if I could move out until we got our stuff sorted out. She told me she was embarrassed that she had opened her life to someone who had overstepped his boundaries, and I could feel the tension between us grow even more. I didn't care. I don't think I did anything wrong at all. I just put things in perspective for her because it didn't seem like she was even trying to get the seriousness of the situation. And after days of wrestling with the thought of how I was feeling, it just became clear to me that I could no longer hold my tongue. She eventually got back to me after some time and asked if we could sit down for a talk. While I expected her to say she was still angry, she expressed that she felt ashamed about how things had turned out. "I didn't know I'd upset you so much," she said. "I shouldn't have shared our private stuff with anyone, especially Devon." I appreciated the acknowledgement, but it did leave me feeling a bit uneasy that I had to be the one to call her out and put her on the spot. Still, I told her I was willing to work on things, but she had to show me some changes. Update: after the confrontation with Sarah, our home felt like a war zone. The air was thick with unresolved tension, and I buried myself in work, letting my HVAC business consume my days. Each customer interaction became a distraction, a momentary escape from the emotional chaos swirling around me. Meanwhile, Sarah struggled with guilt. She threw herself into being a good mother to our daughter Lily, but I could see the cracks. Her forced smiles and cheerful conversations felt like a mask, hiding the regret that lingered in her eyes whenever she glanced my way. The warmth of laughter that once filled our home was replaced by a suffocating silence. Days turned into weeks, and I knew we couldn't continue like this. One evening Sarah mustered the courage to approach me. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaky yet determined. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I nodded. As we sat across from each other at the dining table, the air crackled with unspoken words. "I know I messed up," she began, her voice steadying. "I've been seeing a therapist to understand why I sought comfort elsewhere. I want to fix this." Her admission hit me hard. Trust was fragile, and I struggled to process her words. "It's not that simple, Sarah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Trust doesn't rebuild overnight." "I know," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "But I'm committed to showing you that I can change and miss what we had. I want us back." As the weeks unfolded, we embarked on a journey of healing. Our evenings transformed from silent dinners into deep conversations about our fears and dreams. We scheduled date nights, small outings that allowed us to reconnect. One Friday we went to a diner where we reminisced about our first dates, laughter bubbling up as we shared our favorite memories. For the first time in months, during our dates, Sarah began to peel back her layers, revealing her insecurities and the feelings that had led her astray. I, too, opened up about my own struggles, the fears of inadequacy, and the weight of responsibility. Each conversation felt like a step closer to understanding, a way to bridge the gap that had formed between us. One sunny Saturday, we took Lily to the park. As we sat on a blanket, "You know, I think we might come out of this stronger," I said, feeling a sense of optimism. She smiled, a genuine light in her eyes. "I believe that too. We are learning to communicate again." As months passed, our relationship transformed. We embraced this new chapter with open hearts, sharing our vulnerabilities more freely. The tension in our home began to dissipate, replaced by laughter and love. It was as if we were rediscovering each other, rekindling a flame that had nearly gone out. One night, as we settled into bed, I took her hand. "I'm grateful for this second chance," I said softly. "Me too," she replied, squeezing my hand. I promised to keep working on myself and on us. With each day, we grew closer, our bond deepening as we faced challenges together. The shadows of doubt began to fade, replaced by a sturdy foundation built on trust and communication. Looking back, I realized the road to recovery had been rocky, but it led us to a place of deeper understanding. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever life threw our way. Hand in hand, we were partners again, ready to embrace our future together.